loving this. And Raji, it's so nice to see you. I'm in such a state of awe and gratitude for what we're all co-creating here, and especially to our viewers as well. Go back and read the comments. I want to thank Bridget Renee, who's a lot of times with us. And she's really been commenting some great high vibrational keys as well.
Well, thank you all. I also want Raji's going to introduce Dan Winter, who is someone I feel, and I know Dan, bringing the science of love. He's such a scientist, but he's also grounded in everything we've been talking about. And so his science is about evolving our spiritual nature to hold a frequency of love and beyond love. I mean, yes, love is the grounding, but how do we build out from there? Maybe there's nothing beyond love, but there's a science to where we're going as loving beings. That's what just my little brief introduction to Dan. Raji, you have anything to say about the last couple of days? And
just hello, greetings everyone. Thanks for having me here. It's just been phenomenal to watch and listen and be with such great tribe. And I can't believe we're just like plowing right through, going through with the full moon, super full moon tomorrow, culminating everything on Saturday. I'm stoked. I'll be introducing Neil on Saturday and actually sharing just like 15 minutes from my heart, because I've gone on such a profound journey throughout this process as well. So I felt compelled to share. But it's been amazing, and I'm stoked to be introducing Dan coming up shortly, and just grateful for Portal to Ascension, for holding the space here, for Neil, for doing something just amazing. 11 days, 77 speakers. It's just, wow. We should totally do like a debrief call after this, see what happened. Right?
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Raji.
Thank you so much, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Hey guys, I want to jump on for a second. I'm in a cafe, so there's music behind me.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to say that also the annual alignment with Arcturus starts tomorrow for 3 days. So our sun actually aligns with Arcturus every single year for 3 days. So just throwing that into the field as we bring on more speakers that are connecting us to the galactics. I think it's just a good time to. We're paying reverence to not only all the presenters around the world that are a part of this event, but we're really sending out a signal to the cosmos with what we're doing here. So just want to pull the Arcturians into the field for today as well.
Well, bring Dan on for a second. I want to know what he thought about our discussion. Hey, Dan.
Hi, everybody.
What did you think about that discussion we just had?
Well, I think it's wonderful about, putting love into practice. And, my talk is about what awakening means in terms of unpacking the aura and seeing into the larger array. I'm sorry I didn't see enough of the previous speakers, so I can't say. But I must say I love the smiles. Really wonderful.
Nice.
Ashley, have you ever seen Dan? You have to follow every single word he says. Don't lose us, Dan.
Well, I'm super excited to introduce him. So let's get this show on the road here. So before we get Dan officially on our stage, let's learn a little bit more about him. Dan Winter's background is as multifaceted as his viewpoint. Graduating with honors from the University of Detroit, Dan pursued graduate studies in psychophysiology and the origin of languages. In addition to his academic background, he has worked as a systems analyst with IBM, an industrial metallurgist, and crystallographer. He has undertaken many diverse studies, from quantum physics to modeling at the MIT Space Lab to developing the early biofeedback prototype equipment as Dr. Albert Axis's protege. Widely traveled, Dan has sojourned to study at the Gurdjieff School of Sacred Gymnastics in Florence, and in Florence with Buckminster Fuller, the Giza Pyramids, Israel, the Andes, and Finhorn. Through the years, Dan has lectured on the evolution of consciousness, sacred geometry, and coherent emotion at many national and international conferences. His theories in coherent emotion inspired the notable research at Millard Fillmore Hospital in Buffalo and the HeartMath Institute in California in the mid-90s. Results published by Dr. Glenn Ryan provided conclusive evidence supporting Dan's heart entrainment theories, and he is here today to be sharing his wisdom on our stage today. Welcome, Dan. Take it away.
Thank you for the lovely intro and the lovely smile. I really need the inspiration of you looking so young. That's wonderful. And
I'm looking forward to hearing what you got to say. And I'm a heart math coach, so I am even more interested.
Oh yeah, well, I taught them how to take their first EKG, really, and the first spectrum analysis of EKG we did together, and that history is at realheartcoherence.com. I have to say that intro is entirely 30 years old, so that's why I have a little trouble with feeling young, but I'm going to work at it.
It's all good. All right, take it away.
So what I prepared today really is an extension of what we did here with Portal to Ascension, I don't know, 5 years ago, which is the physics of ascension, and extending that idea into what it means to have an awakening of humanity. And the idea is that if this discussion is correctly done, this could be presented to my associates who are electrical engineers, and every word of it could be measured and described pure electrically, which I feel that kind of electrical precision in this language of what is ascension and what is awakening and what is enlightenment, that if this were done with electrical precision, that should allow us to do it better with, better biofeedback, better measurement. And instead of a subject, it is a very objective discussion that could then eventually teach governments, for example, what a soul is. And that's where we begin, is with our new project called physicsofsoul.com. So I'm going to just see if the screen share is going to work here. One moment. So share screen window. Here we go. So I'm going to share this is my keynote. It's called Gain Energy During Charge Collapse. So you're seeing my screen, I hope. So this is called physicsofsoul.com. And basically, the idea is that in the presence of implosive compression, for example, your heart harmonics when you're feeling love are a phonon sonic caduceus braid, technically called a phase conjugate pump wave. Harmonics like the Schumann cascade and your brain waves, they all make this caduceus shaped cascade. And when they implode and compress, your DNA spits out a coherent longitudinal EMF, literally the physicsofsoul.com. And in this discussion, we're going to use the metaphor of the double Dorji to teach about how this works. Specifically, here's my presentation with Elena Dadan. We've done a lot of work together. That in the center of the Dorji, there is not only a piezo crystal, literally a fire crystal, but there is a clicker, which uses both the energy field of your hand and a piezoelectric phonon, literally a powerful spring-loaded, that will hit the crystal, and that causes the crystals to spit out a longitudinal wave, literally the trident of Neptune and Enki, basically. And this turns out later you can actually teach this as the physics of how Luke Skywalker's lightsaber works. And we're evolving this into an offering we're making at firecrystal.com, PHIRE, where we actually teach the physics of how the Atlantean fire crystal works, which is the same caduceus-shaped phase conjugate pump wave here. In this case, it's coming out this piezo device here called piezofire.com. And when that crystal is fired with the right frequency series, just like what your heart does at the moment of bliss and love, what happens, the crystal implodes, the transverse compression turns into what's called longitudinal scalar or torsional. And that is the beam. That is the beam from your heart at the moment of love. And that beam actually emanates also from your DNA in the radiance, sometimes called longitudinal coherence. And that radiance from your DNA during bliss is also called the physicsofsoul.com. It's also called the Ba from the car, the Kesjan body, the rainbow light body. So what triggers this to happen, for example, in the crystal or your DNA, here you have the Schumann cascade in green here, the Schumann frequency, 7.83 cascading by golden ratio. And this is the actual equation, PlanckFire.com, which predicts what those frequencies will be. And that causes the Z helical axis of that crystal to wring it out. That it's just like you had wrapped a helical towel, and when you squeeze it, the compression converts the transverse waves, which are up and down, as it were, electromagnetics, into a coherent longitudinal beam out the Z-axis. And when that longitudinal beam is pointed, it's actually the physics of what gravity waves are made of, for example. And this gets into physics, which we're not going to go into in great detail, but examples in the literature show that you can use that principle to create gravity. This is what was called the fire crystal of Atlantis. It's also what's called the warp drive of Star Trek, actually. The warp drive is the implosion of that crystal that spits out this coherent longitudinal beam, which is what gravity waves are made of. And the frequencies that trigger it, identical to the frequencies of Schumann and the frequencies of brain waves here during bliss. So top left, here's 5 harmonics in golden ratio in my brain waves on the left here. And those frequencies in that cascade, this is our flameinmind.com, are identical to this cascade here, which is the Schumann harmonics. And both of those have this caduceus shape, phase conjugate pump wave. Think Hermes, the caduceus. And look down below here. Those are exactly the frequencies we measured replicably at our friend Sam in Bosnian Pyramid. People go there and they get rejuvenation. And this is why that pump wave implodes that pyramid to spit out the coherent longitudinal. And that is the physics of pyramidwirelesspower.com. And we have a lot of projects on how global wireless power actually works based on this. But this is getting then back to what needs to happen for your DNA for awakening, for the aura to radiate this coherence. And we're also going to use lucid dreaming as an example. So these are the equations. It's called PlanckFire.com. Planck times integer exponents of golden ratio, fractality perfected, Planck being the length and time, which is the musical key signature of all of physics and the universe. So you multiply Planck by golden ratio repeatedly, and you get this musical cascade that predicts all negentropic processes, Earth year, Venus year, galactic year, precessional year, heart harmonics, brainwave harmonics, Schumann harmonics. It's this cascade, and that's the principle, which is an extension of the idea of Fibonacci gone to completion, which is what golden ratio is. So again, there's too much physics here for us to do the whole thing, but this is just a little background that when you take this crystal, the Z-axis is a helix, and just like in DNA, the asymmetry of the helical axis with the X and Y creates the ability to connect a long wave to a short wave called piezoelectricity, where the stricture, the pressure, which is a long wave, is mechanically connected because of the helix to the shorter wave, which is the voltage. And that connection between the long and the short wave enables fire crystals and your DNA to connect God, I mean, the big world with the little world, as it were. So the piezoelectric principle is behind this. And we talk about the fact that Marcel Vogel, who was my friend at the time, he used a crystal which was concave here. And we now know you can approximate the phase conjugate pump wave, but to do it accurately, you actually need parallel sides. And this will become firecrystal.com, and you can look at that on the web. So, and this is our ultimate device for triggering this bliss wave. It's very inexpensive. It's called piezofire.com, and you can use it to fire a crystal, or you can use it for localized pain reduction, circulation increase. It's very interesting. You can read about it. Piezofire.com. So this is an example of an inexpensive way to create the charge implosion that actually is ultimately ensouling because it produces that long wave coherence. And this is a slide about how carbon nanomaterials do the phase conjugate negentropy. It's a bit, we're not going to, again, do this whole story today. But the short summary of the physics here, and perhaps this is the last of the physics slides, but just to say, this perfection of fractal implosive conjugate charge collapse, named PlanckFire.com, title of my newest book, is the reason gravity exists and objects fall to the ground. It's the reason perception and bliss exist. It's the reason seeds germinate. It's the electrical reason soul exists and bliss. It is the electrical reason pyramids and obelisks make global wireless power. It is the electrical reason zero point and vacuum energy exists. It's the electrical reason golden ratio is a dominant geometry of all orbital mechanics. Hint, how to make gravity. It is the electrical reason electron shells and nuclear hadrons are all simply a platonic nest. Charge collapse perfected. It's called the Anu. It is the electrical reason for all action at a distance. Entanglement is an introduction to perfect phase conjugation. And here is a simple way to visualize that. If you say Om correctly, the spectrum analysis of the sound Om makes a caduceus. And if you pronounce it with grace, the bliss at the climax is a perfect example of a phase conjugate pump wave. So, and again, you could go to PlanckFire.com and look at the physics, but basically Planck times powers of golden ratio create almost actually 200 physical variables predicted, like the exact frequencies of photosynthesis, the exact height versus diameter of DNA, the exact 3 radii of hydrogen, and 200 physical variables are all predicted, PlanckFire.com, by Planck times powers of golden ratio fractality perfected, which is charge collapse. Remember, physics has agreed charge collapse causes gravity and causes consciousness. The question I newly answers is what causes charge collapse? PlanckFire.com. So just like in your DNA having bliss, making you radiant and awakened, here's the fire crystal, literally the warp, the lithium niobate, actually. Fire up those dilithium crystals, Scotty. And so you pump the phase conjugate pump wave into that crystal and you actually create propulsion. So, very simply, when you create that longitudinal wave and it is directional, it is the only definition of what a gravity wave is. Another practical example here is the spine liquid pump, the only definition of Kundalini and bliss, actually. The frequencies of the spine liquid here in green, notably the Mayer wave, 0.1 hertz, the most powerful frequency of the blood, which is the LF component of HRV, and the breath that makes bliss. So this cascade in green is predicted by the frequencies in red, which are PlanckFire.com. So when your spine liquid is pumping like this, it is clinically impossible to be depressed. It's up ledger on sacrocranial pumping. We have lots of slides about that. We're not going to do all those slides. Same principle. So this is basically how pyramids make global wireless power, because they spit out that. So the essential message we're putting home here and below here is brain waves and breath waves and sacrocranial waves, all exactly at Planck times golden ratio. And that caduceus you see points here to Planck in red. And that's actually how we drive all our plasma devices. For example, Therify.net, PlasmaFire.com, PiezoFire.com, FireCrystal.com. They're all driven by exactly and only that perfected charge collapse frequency cascade. And very simply put, now we're trying, again, I'm going a little fast here, but at least I've got pictures. You should be asking me, well, what the heck is a longitudinal wave, sometimes called scalar or torsional? So here's the shape of the vortex from that caduceus. Here's the transverse wave entering on the left. It translates down what's called optimized translation of vorticity, the spiral on golden mean spiral on the perfected 60-degree implosion cone called a caduceus. And out the center of that squirt gun at Planck, it emerges as an organized longitudinal or compressional or scalar wave. And that is what can propagate into the perfected array, which is dodecacosa, the Earth grid example, which is the physics of what dreaming track is made of. And we're going to show in a few slides here the only physics of what a lucid dream is, the only predictor of whether you have a soul or not. And we're going to actually show you the university studies on harmonics that cause lucid dreaming. So anyway, this was Bearden's equation proving that these longitudinal waves are what gravity waves are made of. And this is the physics of, for example, how you make a seed germinate. The seed can't germinate unless it implodes, and it really sucks. And this physics of this symmetric implosion is the definition of the implosion device originally called the first nuclear device on the planet. It was literally implosion. And this is more on the physics of stargates, and we're not going to have time for all these slides. But so I just want to do one more little group here, the DNA section. So here is a braid within the braid within the braid in the harmonics of your DNA. Here, top left 3, center, you have the measurement of heart coherence causing your DNA to recursively coherently braid. Thread braided into string, braided into rope, braided into fat rope. The nest of those phonon envelopes causes the plot to thicken. I mean, the DNA to turn into a torus. I mean, implosion. And that's what causes the DNA to actually spit out a coherent longitudinal wave at the center. The only physics of what a lucid dream is made of, the only physics of having a soul, the only physics of taking something through death, actually. And that's why when when you die, actually, I think we have the Heinrich Clouvet form constants. You actually see this lattice cobweb tunnel spiral here, the Heinrich Clouvet form constants, is what you will see as you are dying, as your life is going through your movie theater. In 1 second, you see your whole life. It's called compression. The reason you see this geometry at the time of death is because death is the implosive black hole of compression into the longitudinal array, which is ancestor memory, which is the songline dreaming track. So this is the heart harmonics of coherence, and I'm going too fast. But so here's the implosion of that braid. So the section I'm going to end with here now is, if you take the Planck times golden ratio, you get exactly and only the two frequencies that cause photosynthesis. So photosynthesis is specifically proven to be the result of phase conjugate optics, that you phase conjugate by golden ratio times Planck, the purple and green, and that's what makes purple and orange, which makes photosynthesis. Or green, which is the opposite and prevents photosynthesis. And also that is the physics of color. You can read about that, phase conjugate, origin of color, fractalfield.com/fractal photosynthesis. The final section here is the university study of the frequencies which cause lucid dreaming, bottom right, which turns out to be the same cascade which we're driving into Therify.net, which replicably causes lucid dreaming. The predictor, are you going to take memory through death? You implode, compress, and propagate and see through that array. Remember, your synapses are an array. If you want to inhabit a larger array, like lucid dreaming and taking memory through death, you need to implode, compress, and embed in that array, and then you become centripetal in that array, and you can see through it like an eyeball. For example, our friend Jean-Charles Moyen, who made these brainwaves, golden ratio and octave cascade, just before he replicably teleported with witnesses, came back with sand between his toes. There's lots of stories about this you can read about. And more simply, when we teach young people to see without their eyes, they begin to see a vortex appear inside their head, blindfolded. They've made this bliss frequency, and they see a little tunnel, a vortex, which is the physics of consciousness. Consciousness is that plasma vortex in your synaptic array. And when that comes to a focus, because these harmonics have squeezed and imploded that cascade like this. Okay, I'm going to stop the screen share now. Too many pictures, too little time. But here's the storal to the Mori, as it were. Your brainwaves learns the skill, like kids learning to have bliss, like people learning to have kundalini, like people learning to go to sacred sites and see down the song line like it's an eyeball. So your brainwaves are making this alpha, beta, gamma cascade like this. These are the fingers, and those fingers are squeezing the liquid crystal charge vortex supported by the synaptic array called the net of fireflies inside your head. Now, when those harmonics and brainwaves achieve bliss, flameinmind.com, literally a flame in the mind, that vortex comes to a point. And the kids seeing without their eyes all say the same thing. Oh, a little wormhole opened inside my head, and at the center, there was an eyeball, and I could see through it. And again, we always say this, but it's so cool that the kids who learned this discipline of entering bliss, which, by the way, many of them achieve that by imagining themselves in beautiful nature. Your body flips a switch, you get fractal, and then you implode. And you create that implosive center point. You become centripetal. And that is the physics of consciousness. So that vortex inside your head can be taken outside your head. And that is the physics of consciousness. And anyone who says they're teaching the physics of consciousness and does not tell you how you can be conscious and see from outside your body, that person doesn't know what the physics of consciousness is. The physics of consciousness is that vortex. And that's what has the potential to be immortal, lucid dream, and take memory through death. So you organize the centripetal force of that vortex, getting conscious. And by the way, focused attention causes charge to compress. It is centripetal, exactly like gravity is. Physics doesn't know why anything is centripetal. So listen to me, not them. So the point is that the ability to get centripetal versus get dead is the ability to strengthen consciousness. And actually, when that implosive power happens, for example, at a magnetic line cross, at sunrise and sunset, at Agnihotra, you have more access to that, what's called longitudinal coherence EMF array. which is how physicists name what the Aboriginals called dreaming track songline. So what happens is you engage that compression, you impedance match, and you implode and you embed into that array, and you get centripetal in that array like a Tibetan saint causing rainbows at the moment of death. That's an example of getting centripetal in the array. Okay. So, and then at the nodes of that array and having access to sacred site magnetic cross lines, dolmen, the good stuff, gives you the ability to use that array like an eyeball. So inhabiting the larger array electrically is the only definition of ascension. It is the only definition of awakening. You're literally becoming coherent in a larger synaptic array, which is actually the sacred sites of Earth. And what it is not, let me tell you what is not the immortal array. What is not the immortal array is metal buildings, steel and aluminum, full of electrosmog, Wi-Fi, and Bluetooth in ugly cities. This is not the array. And people who inhabit those places are losing their soul, children by the billions losing their soul because we are not teaching what is the physics of soul.com. This is my little shtick here, my little enthusiasm, is to suggest to you that after we can teach governments what bliss is and how it creates this coherent cocoon, the Ba from the Ka, Kesjan body, rainbow light body, a coherent embedded array of longitudinal emission called the physics of soul.com, the shining ones. Until we can teach governments and universities what that is, we are going to continue to lose billions of souls of children, who are walking around with this god-awful, soul-destroying Bluetooth and Wi-Fi in their ears all day long, absolutely fractionating and destroying all physics of attention. I mean, it is so simple. You take the soul-destroying, warm, fluorescent crap light out of your kid's classroom and you install sunlight. You measure then a dramatic increase in attention span. Now, if the person who designed those lights knew what attention is, knew what attention is the implosion that results from the right frequency cascade, phase conjugate sunlight, photosynthesis. Whereas when they put the wrong light and the wrong frequencies and the wrong dielectrics, metal and aluminum, all of which prevents implosive capacitance, which is the definition of bioarchitects.net, our global international program on the physics of biologic architecture. Basically, learning to make a building which will measurably electrically cause a seed to germinate. We teach it, we measure it a dozen different ways. You can read all about it, bioarchitects.net. The building that causes a seed to germinate measurably electrically is implosive, electrically centripetal. It is the opposite of electrosmog. It is the opposite of steel and aluminum. Living biologic materials, which defines biologic architecture, are high dielectric, which means capacitively efficient, which means allows the building to breathe charge. Do not send your kids to steel and aluminum school buildings. This is a mistake, especially if they're full of Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. This is soul destruction. Somebody needs to tell these fools to quit that crap. Actually, this is my humble opinion. So once we learn the definition of biologic architecture, like how did biology make a seed that could germinate? If you knew the physics, you spray longitudinal coherence, therify.net or plasmafire.com, at a living seed, you cause it to germinate. Why? You cause it to get centripetal. A primary function of most of the original stone dolmen were to treat seeds to cause them to germinate, because it really sucks. I mean, it has to get implosive or it's dead. So anyway, this is the storal to my mori today, which is the practical hygiene to teach our young people how to have a bliss process. Literally the definition, if we believe the Aboriginals, who were very clear on this, if you cannot teach your young people how to have a bliss experience, you absolutely do not have culture. We better tell the people in the UK that Football ain't culture. Sorry. No, it's the opposite of permission to touch. No, hell no, that ain't culture. And it does not immortalize. Whereas if you know how to teach your kids how to have a bliss experience, it defines culture for biologically appropriate reasons, because access to bliss creates the definition of immune health, harmonic inclusive heart rate variability, literally fractality, implosiveness, literally the ability to radiate coherence. So let's learn how to teach young people how to have bliss experience. Take them to a sacred site, do some sacred dance, teach them what touch permissive means, teach them what ride the long wave means, take them out of the goddamn metal buildings with electrosmog and put them into nature, and the kids can have a bliss experience, and then they will have a soul. And this, I say, defines the possibility of ascension, the possibility of what's called awakening. You're literally awakening to something very specific, electrical, fractal, and measurable. A coherent longitudinal array, just like the Earth grid sacred sites are a dodecacosa, right? That's where the longitudinal waves converge and exchange compression with radiance. So actually what happens is, as Korotkov measured, commercial military quality telepathy only happens on the Earth grid at the dodecacosa sacred site nodes. And as Bruce Cathy, my friend, also measured, that there's a dramatic reduction in nuclear critical mass at those sacred magnetic line cross sites. And we know why, because magnetic compression is the definition of critical mass, actually, which is how the Ark of the Covenant contained the Anunnaki nukes. But that's another story. So access to the nodes of the array means your kids need to know how to make a magnetic map of their bed, their house, and their village. And then you rearrange the magnetic lines to look like a rose, and then you're done. Because you can then inhabit the array, then you can lucid dream, then you can have a soul, then you can be what's called enlightened or awakened or ascended. The reason, remember, this is a review of something we did here 12 years ago. The reason it's called ascension is because when you can coherently superpose a braid within a braid, for example, a dodecahelical ratchet, slinky DNA, then you braid the thread into rope, string into rope, and a fat rope, the braid within the braid of the braid, 7 times actually. The longer wave is then coherently phase embedded within, which means one axis of spin is superposed with each superposed spin rotation. And so what's literally ascended is the number of harmonics, which can only proceed past 3D by golden ratio, actually. That's why you have to embed the cube in the dodecahedron here. Here's the tetracube in the inside. You can barely see it into the pentodeca. So the golden ratio allows you to braid, embed, and nest, which what physics calls this entanglement. We now know that phase conjugation is the climax form of entanglement. The only physics of all action at a distance is that longitudinal array. It's the physics of stargates we've talked about. It's the physics of teleporting. It's the physics of propagating your awareness into the lucid dream. It's the only physics of remote viewing. It's the only physics of astral travel. Once you know what a longitudinal array is, for example, now that you know why temples, labyrinths, churches, Therify, and bliss process, all in general, they work better at the cross point of those magnetic lines. They work better at sunrise and sunset. They work better at solstice and equinox. It's all because there's a 4-wave mixing alignment, allowing embedding into a larger longitudinal array when you understand the physics. So, for example, we have about 5 different plasma healing technologies now: plasmafire.com, piezofire.com, therify.net, and more coming, firecrystal.com. And all of them are used commonly and regularly successful for remote healing. And remote healing is not a mystery. No, we know what enables remote healing. So if the sender and receiver are both at a magnetic cross point, if it's done at sunrise and sunset, if there's a psychotronic witness, all which enables coherent connection to the longitudinal array, that is the only physics of action at a distance in remote healing, for example. And action at a distance, the longitudinal array, is the only story to the memory of almost any spiritual story you've ever heard is about action at a distance. For example, if you want to do plasma containment for fusion research, hello, you need a longitudinal array. All right, so I have carried on here. I see it's just before 7. I went too fast. I showed a bunch of pictures. Have we articulated a storal to the Mori? I mean, so just to review now, we are saying that what we had called ascension, what we had called awakening, what we had called physicsofsoul.com is one very specific and measurable electrical phenomena which must be taught by electrical engineers. Me? No, it's the only tool you have, a hammer. Everything is a nail. No, it's the other way around. So the very specific physics here is you need to learn what a coherent longitudinal array is. And then you know what Egyptians called Ba from the Ka, what Gurdjieff called Kesjan, and what Tibetans call rainbow light body. You can practically plan for the hygiene for your body to embed in that array. For example, live food, live enzyme food, genetic diversity, access to sacred sites, access to magnetic cross points, access to the kinesthetics of movement, which enable compression, called the quality of grace. If the geometry of curvature and the change of the rate of movement is correct, you will feel a tingle in your finger at the end of that spiral. That's the physics of yoga, right? It's implosive capacitance. And the final category of that practical hygiene to become immortal, I mean, to have a soul, I mean, to ascend, I mean, to awaken. The practical hygiene, the last category, which we like to talk about, is something that you might call pure intention. Remember when I invented realheartcoherence.com? I invented the word heart coherence. I'm credited in the literature because we did a second order power spectra, the EKG. So the onset of internal laser-like phase coherence in the EKG, a simple measure, second order power spectra. So the peak will go up when your heart harmonics are phase coherent. And so that peak is going up and down. You can read about it, realheartcoherence.com. But the thing that's cool and instructive here is the onset of that coherence measure, goes up or down, is literally a functional lie detector, a functional working lie detector. So if he said, I love you, I want to marry him, and you see his heart coherence go, he's speaking his truth, actually. Whereas if the heart coherence goes down, no, because the heart knows which waves are biologically distributable. And that definition of what is a shareable wave, which is perfect charge distribution, sometimes called Hey Ave, heaven, or plains of Sharon, or Champs-Elysees. These are names for perfected charge distribution. Go to heaven. and that is a name for the physics of the only thing that gets into that array, ancestor memory, songline, dreaming track. Remember, in Aboriginal terms, that access to that ancestor memory is the only definition of God or the divine, is if you're doing the work of that array. The reason is, excuse me, when I get carried away, my voice says, oops. The reason is because the energy in that longitudinal array has been gathering and storing the symmetry of survival memory only for 1 million years. And you can't get in or out of that array unless you have some new information which is perfectly distributable and serves everyone in that array. The ability to compress, which is the only physics of successful death, that black hole, is because to get into that array, to release a ghost, for example, you have to embed, impress, and there has to be something you would call pure intention. In practical terms, here's what it means. Every time you think a shareable thought, I fried my voice, oops. Every time you think a shareable thought, your hair stands up, right? It's called eureka. The reason your hair stands up electrically when you think a shareable thought is you have imploded the capacitance from the array. Now, if in fact every single thought you ever had was an analysis of pure principle, which resulted in a discovery of something that serves everything, everyone, that pure principle, that pure, what's called pure intention, which is heart coherence, means that you are continually imploding the capacitance of the array, which means quite literally, you will never die. It means quite literally that the only reason you need to die is you chose to think too many thoughts which were not shareable, were not compressible, and didn't distribute well into that array. If you train yourself that your pattern of thinking is always about pure principle. For example, oh, there's some people fighting over there, and these are bad people, blah, blah, blah. However, if you saw there was a fight over there and you meditated deeply and you understood for like 7 generations where that anger came from, and you took inside yourself the embeddable compassion of the consumed perspective, as if you were inside the eyeballs on every different side of that argument at once, literally family constellation therapy, suddenly you would have what in the Shakespearean theater was called consumed perspective, which is why it's an octahedron. All the different emotions sequence in phase produce consumed perspective. And at the end of the Shakespearean play, you go, oh, you have this enlightenment moment. Well, that's consumed perspective. That is the hygiene of the practice to think only shareable thoughts. And that's the final category of the practical hygiene for bliss. You have the nutrition aspects, you have the find your place of power aspect, you have the sacred gymnastic, the kinesthetic aspect, but you also have the hygiene of the discipline of thinking only shareable thoughts. And that enables the implosive compression that then allows your aura to radiate this coherent stuff, Kesjan, Ba from the Ka, rainbow light body coherence longitudinal, which is the physics of soul, which allows you to inhabit the array. And that is the physics of ascension and the physics of awakening. So I'm hoping that was a happily ever after. And I think I squeezed that into about 30 or 35 minutes. Do we have time for questions here, or let's see, add me on, okay, it's empathy and compassion on crack. That's what is in the array. It is. It's what makes a thought shareable. Yes, reading the questions in the window here is very helpful. What makes a thought shareable is the fact that the wave has achieved fractal distribution. And so shareable thought is a name for the electric symmetry which propagates non-destructively into that array. And if your thinking is based on compassion, which is the heart turning inside out recursively, implosively, it is, I'm turning myself inside out for you, darling. The physics of compassion, which is the physics of empathy, which ultimately is the physics of soul. That's why when we fail to teach the physics of soul, we find more and more people are losing empathy and compassion because they literally can't feel for others. And if we may share an example of the electrical engineering of this. So the Princeton Noosphere project, they take what's called a Josephson junction, which is a square wave capacitor, and they measured a dramatic change in the random number generators powered by those capacitors on 9/11. So clearly, 3,000 people dying at once sent a wave which was measurable into the array. Now, so what they know for sure is global emotion is measurable. What they don't know is the physics. I'm going to tell you now what the physics is. The physics is that Josephson junction is actually effectively a square wave capacitor, more sensitive to the longitudinal component of the EMF, the longitudinal coherent EMF physics of the collective consciousness. So if you had a way to measure the amount of longitudinal EMF coherence, and physics doesn't know much about that at all. That's why the Princeton Noosphere people are so confused. Actually, it's the longitudinal component that makes that work. So when 3,000 people died, yes, you could measure the effect on the array. Now, people who have empathy feel other people's feelings directly, phase locked into their DNA because of that implosion. Anyway, that's my happily ever after. What do you think, dear?
Thank you, Dan. Thanks for answering my question about what makes a thought shareable. I took some notes here. Yes, you did speed through things, and I was like, I had to hold on really tight and follow. So my first question, because we don't have a ton of time, and I want to thank you, is I want to go back to attention is the implosion.
Yep.
Like what? Okay, so when I think of that, I think about when I am meditating and then every other possibility collapses, and then it's just this one that I chose. And so tell me a little bit more about the attention as implosion.
I love that you call it collapse. That is exactly the right word. It is literally perfected collapse. That's what it is. In fact, many psychologists call the process of creating compassion in groups, they name the process the collapse process.
Wow.
And that's how the fusion example happens. So when there is collapse, then all memories can be compressed implosively, and then the vortex can come to a point called attention. And they see through the center of that vortex, when it implodes accurately at Planck, is the only definition of what an eyeball is.
Right.
It is the phase conjugate physics of perception. And you can measure, for example, the power of someone's attention is electrically measurable by how much it creates a squeezing electrically. Mind meld with Orion Queen Mog feels like a vice-like grip, or William Tiller measured 10 different ways. Focused human attention causes electrical compression. So it is implosion, absolutely. And the measurement of that compression is the measurement of the power of your intent.
Right. Okay. So thank you. This would be such a great Star Trek episode, by the way. Like, I'm a huge fan. And you're talking about arrays, and I'm thinking about Voyager. I just finished Deep Space Nine. Like,
oh yeah. And by the way, the plasma physics of 9, I did a great recording with Elena Denon. It's actually nice. 9 plasma donuts is why you have 9 chakras. They self-organize.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so now let's go to the Taurus.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we know about the Taurus, and we know at the center point of the heart. Okay, perfect. Okay, some people say it's a black hole. That eyeball is a donut, and you go through the black hole, and it pops you out to another reality. What do you?
An array. Actually,
okay.
So the thing is, the center point of that donut is precise. It is Planck, length and time. And so when the harmonics that lead the vortex there are tuned to Planck, called PlanckFire.com, then at the implosion point, there is an efficient conversion of transverse to longitudinal. And that squirt gun then effectively, that is the only physics of stargates, for example, and telepathy and portals and remote viewing, for sure.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so then we become the central pedal, but then what about the centrifugal? So what about this energy?
The physics of bliss starts with compression, and then radiance is possible, identical with how a rose works. So compression first, then radiance. And so if the compression is implosive, then you can radiate into the array. But if you don't learn the physics of compression, then there is no bliss, basically.
I see. And then how do you know when you are in the array, or you've contacted it, or you're in connection with it?
Well, the physics of lucid dreaming is instructive there. So if you have access to a magnetic line and you do these practices, for example, by looking at your hand inside the dream, it adds the recursive biofeedback loop, which compresses the aura and makes the dream more lucid, because that compression impedance matches you to the node of the array, and then the node of the array becomes your eyeball into the array. So, for example, if you have a sacred site that you do your bliss meditation, particularly at sunrise and sunset, and you close your eyes and you look down the song lines like it's an eyeball, it's literally the only physics of telepathy as well.
Oof, that reminds me of the Gita, and in the cosmic reveal, Krishna mentions the billion eyes. And
exactly.
So, it's like,
and you know, the billion eyes on the peacock's feather is a perfectly spaced fractal array. That's what the peacock feathers are. And you know, the million facets on an insect eyeball. The consumed perspective is enabled by the phase discipline.
By the phase, say that again?
The phase discipline. The angle between each facet on the insect eye has precise phase discipline that allows the implosion for the communion of visions e pluribus unum, from many one.
And then what about phase variance, though? Can you change? How can you get into a phase variance? And are you able to even, like, can you control that, is what I'm saying? Or does nature control that?
Well, one way to ask that question is, once you've entered the lucid dream or death, and your vortex is propagating, right? Yeah. And the obvious question is, how do you steer?
Yeah. Hold on tight.
Well, but if you look at the physics, this spiral on this torus, if you cast a shadow indexed by tetra cube, the shadows are Hebrew and Sanskrit literally, which are plasma propulsion vector directors to steer your jets. So actually, if you visualize one sacred letter, you've actually controlled the angle of the phase of the donut of your vortex in your optical cortex,
Whoa.
enabling you to steer.
Whoa. Whoa. I have never even I have to practice that. I have to see it for myself.
The animations are at goldenmean.info/DNA ring the physics of the origin of Hebrew and Sanskrit. So it's actually about controlling the tilt angle or phase of donuts, which is your controlling the jets on your.
What about Greek letters? For some reason, I've been kind of obsessed with them lately, and I don't know why. I wonder.
There's a superset alphabet called Ophanim Enochian, goldenmean.info/Ophanim, which is a superset of the tetracubes, so those symmetry shadows into hypercube dodecaecosa, Ophanim Enochian. And from there, we derived Greek. You can see the animations at goldenmean.info/Greek.
Right.
Yeah. Wow. But if you go to Athens, don't tell them you've discovered what's the origin of Greek, because they will shoot you.
Okay. I will not. Whoa. I feel like, okay, I just need to let that settle. Do we have any other questions? I wonder, Neil, can we see what's happening on YouTube? Is there anything else that's coming up from YouTube? Let's see here.
I don't know how our time window is going here, but I'm happy to share. Eyes are the easiest way to convey consciousness. That's good. Yes. And in fact, the twinkle in the eye is actually, if you see the twinkle fade, it's actually the harmonic inclusiveness. So the more the eye is twinkling, the more the high frequencies are present and the more the focus is possible. For example, John Dee used scintillation for ancestral communication, the same way they used obsidian mirrors for ancestor phone calls, the show stone and the Olmec.
Did you say scintillation?
Yeah, scintillation. Basically, when light scintillates or sparkles, the pinhole mirror is an example. The focal point of the scintillation is actually the place of conjugation. The easiest way to understand that is the physics of scrying, ancestor phone calls, black obsidian mirrors. They're phase conjugate mirrors, and they enable a coupling to the longitudinal array, the only physics of clairvoyance.
Okay, thank you. Dan, if I said, hey, Dan, I don't think light travels, I think it emerges, what would you say to that?
Well, electricians got very shocked when they say electrons don't go far. They just bounce down a row. Or another way to put it is there's only one electron. It just gets around.
Oh, that's good. Okay, what's really the connection?
Go ahead.
What's really the connection between Shakespearean theaters being square octave and creating emotions?
Yeah, no, you can read about this in the physics of the origin of consumed perspective in Shakespearean theater. Some of that is at goldenmean.info/Ophanim. Basically, classically, the Shakespearean theater is a cube octa. Now, if you experience the emotions of opposite characters and they're standing in the opposite phase in the cube octa, one at a time, this emotion, opposite emotion, and you experience the sequence of emotion in perfect angular phase, at the end, your memory of those emotions and their geometric positions is the physics of phase conjugate optics, which means it can implode, collapse, and be consumed in phase conjugation. You can have the experience at the climax of the play of oneness, specifically because of that symmetry discipline in phase with the emotions sequence.
Wow. Tell us again, where can we find more info on that again? Which
the cube octa symmetry, the origin of consumed perspective in Shakespearean theater. We have some of that at goldenmean.info/Ophanim. I did some of that work with our academic on this, Teresa Burns.
Awesome. And Dan, Emily wants to know, where's the best place to start to understand all of your work?
Well, my newest book, plankfire.com, PLANCKPHIRE, plankfire.com, has all 5 of my books and links to all my websites. I do have too many websites, admittedly. Indexes at fractalfield.com, goldenmean.info, therify.net, flameinmind.com, pyramidwirelesspower.com, physicsofsoul.com. Yeah, too many websites.
Okay, before we let you go, I have a quick question, and I want to hear your thoughts on reincarnation and past lives from this perspective. If we can carry our memories into death, what happens?
Absolutely.
What happened?
Absolutely, yes. And the memory of past life is it would be a tragedy if you had to take your memory through death, and it was not pure principle. It would be totally distraction. However, if your intent at the moment of death, like the yearning of your ancestors at the moment of death, is the wind in your sails. So if you have a shareable wave, pure intent, which is phase coherent longitudinally at the moment of death, then more of that memory is literally propagable through death. So what we call soul, as in Jane Roberts' Education of Oversoul 7, the oversoul is the fact that when you discover the long wave intent of your soul, which is long memory, the only definition of soul, then you can take memory through death, because there's a symmetric, disciplined relationship to your service of the long-term intent. So taking memory through death definitely has to do with pure intention.
Interesting. Thank you. And so there's the long array.
That's
and then there's not a short array, right? There's only the long array.
Well, the shorter array is inside your head. The longer array is outside your head. The longer array is the discipline of the Earth grid, for example. And to inhabit that array, when the great ancestors died in Australia, the storm went down the song line 3,000 miles. And that was the song line that family had for a family pet for 1,000 years. So they inhabited that song line. They knew which song went where on that song line, and they inhabited that array. That was real physics. But to inhabit that array meant that they usually didn't leave their place of birth, and they had a stone which showed the carving of the magnetic lines of the neighborhood, which was the title deed to the land which they were responsible for dreaming. The dreaming was literally what held their world together.
Wow. What do you think is holding our world together right now?
Not much. No. I think, why don't you ask a local physicist if they know why anything is centripetal? And then we will know why nothing is holding our world together. We do not know how to make the gravity that holds atmosphere, even though that was a primary purpose of pyramids originally. They were called a gravity diode, because they would implode and stabilize gravity and therefore atmosphere and global wireless power. So we must teach physics why anything is centripetal, starting with why objects fall to the ground, and then they might know what holds the world together, which is called the physics of peacemaking, peaceuniversity.net.
Is that another one of your .coms?
Yeah, it's peaceuniversity.net. Basically, when Callahan discovered that village A and village B make war the day the magnetic line between them break, so if you fix those magnetic lines, it is proven that is the physics of peacemaking, because peacemaking is defined by the negentropy getting centripetal produces.
Well, I have so many more questions. But is there anything else that you want to add or share?
I see.
End of our time together.
I see pure intention in your eyes, dear. Like, you are genuinely curious, and your sincere curiosity here is a great blessing. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate you and all the work that you do and the being that you are and all of your websites. I can't wait to play and go jumping around from all of them. Now, let's see what is up next here. Dan, I want to thank you again for being here with us and sharing all your teachings and wisdom. Thank you. And here's Alan.
Dan, it's always good to see you. I missed some of your thing, but to sum up, where are you going and where's the future headed?
Well, we think our message is becoming more shareable, which is good. We hit 3 million views and 50,000 subscribers on YouTube. And our technologies, now there's a dozen of them, and they're all based on the same principle, plankfire.com. And this message is getting out there. We're great. Just had our big 4th international conference. See the film library, fractalfield.com/2024. Very successful. So we're happy.
Well, are you still in the south of France in the mountains?
Yes, and between here and Australia, but yes.
Oh, Australia. Oh, okay. Well, I want to visit you again. Let's go, Raji. He has a beautiful place.
Let's go. Let's do it. Okay, guys. Many blessings. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Dan. Great to see you.
Thank you. Blessings. Take care. See you again. Bye, Raja.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
That's Dan Winter, ladies and gentlemen.